President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that we have Tennesseans that are watching, and many people are saying, why is it that you all are here? Because this was to be a week where we were working in our states. And of course, many of us have set meetings in our state, but here we find ourselves as we are looking at this piece of legislation that all of a sudden has become a must-pass. Now, the schedule for when we were going to be in and out of session came out in December, back around the 1st of December. So that is when we decide how we're going to organize our year and our work periods and meet those obligations to our constituents. But what we find out is there is all of a sudden this deadline that has to be met because it is the Munich conference. And we have a delegation that is going, and they don't want to go empty-handed. They want to take this bill that is going to be more money for Ukraine. Now, there are some of us who have said, hey, wait a minute. We've got these problems at our southern border, and we really can't help others until we deal with the crisis at our southern border. There are some of us who remember what happened on 9/11, and we remember the impact that that had on our nation, and we'll never forget that. And we realize how important it was to get our country back on track. And we did that. We moved forward aggressively, not only militarily, but getting our economy back on track, stabilizing our country, changing how we looked for terrorism, and taking steps that were necessary to protect the citizens of this country, to protect individuals in their communities, in their places of work, and to make certain that they knew we were going to be there to put them first and the protection of this country first. Well, but of course, deadlines and work periods have a way of forcing issues, of saying, well, this has got to be done and we have to meet this deadline. And I would suggest to all of my colleagues that after we return from this work period, guess what? There's all of a sudden going to be this deadline and this push that, oh, we've got the CR coming up, we've got to take action right now, so everybody's got to get in the same boat and vote for things that you really don't want because we just cannot have a government shutdown. That is going to be the message that is there. Bear in mind, I think it's been now 103 days since the Democratic leader has allowed an appropriations bill to come to this floor for consideration. And because of the good work of Senators Collins and Murray, the Senate's appropriations bills came out of the Appropriations Committee in July. But no, they're not coming to this floor because then the Democratic leader would have to give up the ability to jam it and to get what he wants right at the very end. Just like there's this jam to get this bill passed before the Munich conference so that it can be smiles, handshakes, and backslaps when they get there. But I think our allies would like for us to take care of ourselves and secure our border so that indeed we are going to be able to continue to help them, because this is a dangerous place. This world's a dangerous place. And there is an axis of evil, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that are working overtime, trying to destroy the United States. They don't hide that that is their goal. They're really pretty open about that being their goal. China, they want global domination. Russia, they want to be able to sell China oil. Iran wants to sell China oil. Indeed, Iran is making billions of dollars every single month selling oil to China because this administration withdrew the sanctions on Iran, the sanctions that President Trump and his administration had put in place that prohibited them from selling oil. But instead of the president putting those sanctions back on Iran and prohibiting that, and that's what is giving them the money they need to go out here and fund their proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, ISIS Syria, ISIS Iraq, the IRG. Where do they get their equipment, their training, their missiles, their rockets? Courtesy of Iran. That is where they get it. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about we've got to pass this bill. We've got to do it right now because the happy handshakes are going to depend on it when they all get over to Munich. But what we need to be doing is paying attention to what is happening here on our own shores. Are we concerned about Israel? You better believe we are. We know that they are in a fight for survival. We also know that Iran is who is funding Hamas. Taiwan, are we concerned about them? Absolutely. And we want to make certain that Taiwan has what they need. I've even introduced legislation that would authorize a defense lend-lease program for Taiwan. It's important for them to have that. It's important for people to be able to pay back what we give them. Now, another thing that we need to do is look at the expectations of our enemies. We've got enemies that expect us at this point in time because of this president and his administration to be weak and to give them running room. They like that. They think that's a good thing. And they think that because this president is weak when it comes to our southern border, that they can push people into our country. From October to the end of the year, 24,000 Chinese, I think it was, Mr. President, that came in through our borders. You're talking about people from, according to the Border Patrol, 170 different countries that were coming across our border. And we know that these 8.8 million illegal immigrants that have entered this country under President Joe Biden's watch are not all individuals that are coming here for a better life. We know some of them are coming here to do us harm. Indeed, the FBI director in December, when he was before our committee, Mr. President, he responded to Senator Graham's question about what he saw with the terrorist threat. And indeed, in paraphrasing his comments, he talked about how he had never seen such broad-based threats, and that everywhere he looked, he saw red lights flashing. The world's a dangerous place. And Mr. President, it's coming to our border. Now, there are some things that we had wanted to get done in this bill that are not going to be done. And I will note for my colleagues that H.R. 2, which I know my Democratic colleagues do not like that bill. I know that. I understand that. We have a difference of opinion on that. But H.R. 2 is the House border security bill. Border security. What people are demanding that we do, secure our southern border. Now that landed on our desk at Senate Judiciary Committee, and of course Homeland Security has part of that, and HHS has part of that, the Senate Help Committee, but it landed on May 15th. Now, Mr. President, we've had over 80 meetings of the Senate Judiciary Committee since that bill landed. Not once have we even looked at taking it up, amending it, letting regular order take place, letting people amend that bill and make it a work product of the committee. That is not what has happened, but it is what should have happened, allowing regular order to take place and people to be able to weigh in and speak on this bill. But there was a decision not to move forward with that. Instead, it was pushed to the side and a special committee put in place, and they were tasked with solving what was going to be a border and national security bill. Interestingly enough, and I know that they all worked hard, and I know Senator Langford put his best efforts into that. But you know, Mr. President, I think there's a lot to be said for going by regular order, letting the committees take up a piece of legislation, letting the committees do their work on that piece of legislation. But that did not happen. But when I talk to Tennesseans, they are terribly concerned about what is happening with the open border because they see the impacts in their communities every single day, and the impacts are undeniable. When you look at the tens of thousands of U.S. citizens that lose their lives every year to fentanyl poisoning, and right now, Mr. President, the #1 killer of U.S. citizens in the 18 to 45-year-old age bracket is fentanyl. We know the Chinese are working hand in glove with the Mexican cartels, especially the Sinaloa cartel, that is right there on the Mexico side across from that Arizona border. They are working overtime. They're pressing those pills, and then they're pushing them across the border. That is what they think is going to help them attack us and harm our citizens. The drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking that is taking place every single day. Local law enforcement, I visit with each of our 95 Tennessee counties every single year. And to a county, law enforcement tells me they can't deal with the drugs and the human trafficking and the gangs and the crime until we secure the southern border. They're trying, but it continues to grow every single day. Now, another thing that concerns everyone, and this ties us back to the FBI's comments about seeing flashing red lights, and that is the number of people who are special interest aliens that are coming from countries like Iran and Afghanistan and Syria, and they're flooding into our country. As I said, people from 170 countries is what the Border Patrol tells us came across our border last year. Think about that. These are people who are making a choice to come across our southern border, paying a cartel to come across that border, instead of legally coming into this country. That is a choice that they are making. Now, also, the terrorist watch list, in addition to those hundreds that are coming from special interest countries, you've got 49 terrorist watch list individuals that have been apprehended at the border since the start of fiscal year 2024. So we know that this danger is there. We know these individuals are coming into our country, and we know that our law enforcement professionals are telling us, it's not a question of if we have another terrorist attack on U.S. soil. It is a question of when. So when you look at what has transpired with this security supplemental and the $113 billion that has already gone to Ukraine, and by the way, some of us keep asking for a full accounting of where that money is. Some of us continue to ask for what we consider a win with Ukraine. We continue to ask what is the strategy that is being implemented there. But what we get back at us is crickets. So some of us have had amendments that we think would make the legislation before us, the security supplemental, a stronger piece of legislation. Now, I had several amendments that I had proposed. Number 1540 would limit the number of aliens who can be paroled into the U.S. every year. Because if you look at the numbers from previous administrations, Democrat and Republican, you see that many multiples of those numbers are what the Biden administration is waving right on into the country. I also had an amendment, number 1534, that would prohibit any of our taxpayer dollars going into Gaza until all the hostages have been released. There again, our citizens do not want their tax dollars going into Gaza being scooped up by Hamas through UNRWA and that being pushed forward. Now, my amendment 1535 would accelerate deportations for illegal aliens who physically assault first responders. Indeed, we have seen more of that than we would like to see in this country. So they should be immediately deporting. I also have 1547, which would prohibit the president and his administration from selling or removing any of the existing border wall or the components that are out there for the border wall. Mr. President, it was distressing to us to hear that the president was choosing to sell off the border wall when Border Patrol tells us they need a physical barrier, they need better technology where they cannot have a physical barrier, and then they need more officers and agents. Giving them that physical barrier should be something that we agree to do. Number 1548 would put back in place the President Trump era migrant protection protocol. Stay in that safe third country. Execute your claim for asylum there. That is something that would be an assistance to our Border Patrol. Now, my amendment number 1539 should be something that we would all agree on. And Madam President, this would allow the border states to place temporary barriers on federal land to protect their communities. Now, for those of us that have been to the border many times, we have walked along this border and we've met with ranchers and we've met with farmers and we've met with property owners who say, you know, we're losing the right to private property. They can show you pictures of dead bodies they have found on their ranches. They can show you pictures of fields of melons and tomatoes and produce that have been literally trampled by people that are coming across. So allowing them the right to protect that property. Everybody should agree someone has the right to protect their property. A homeowner backing up to the border there in Arizona need not worry that they're going to walk out their back door and find illegal aliens napping in the backyard or taking a dip in a swimming pool or leaving clothes and water bottles strewn right around their back porch. Now, one that I have worked on for quite a while, number 1536, is the End Child Exploitation Act. What this would do is end that horrible practice of child recycling. Now, Madam President, you and I are moms. I'm a grandmom. And this legislation would require a DNA test for adults and children to determine the familial relationship between an alien and an accompanying minor. This is important to do. During the Trump era, we did DNA testing at the southern border. Not a difficult task. It's a 45-minute test. And this will save a child's life because we found that fully a third of those children were being trafficked. We also have learned from Border Patrol that many times a child will present with an adult, they get across the border, and then the child is cut loose. And on the child's arm, and phone number, who to call to send the child back across the border. Border Patrol tells us some of these children have been, they have been recycled 8 or 9 times. There is a way we could end that. The Prince Act would also help us to end this recycling by fingerprinting non-citizens under the age of 14. Now, there is another issue that I have been working on for about a year, and it is to find out what has happened with the unaccompanied alien children that have been released to sponsors who have not been properly vetted. Right now, we have 85,000 children that we do not know where they are, if they're dead or alive, if they're trafficked or not. My amendment 1537 would have addressed this issue and required HHS to report back to us. We should all agree that these unaccompanied alien children should be protected. They ought not to be being sex trafficked. They ought not to be in labor gangs and crews. They ought not to be unprotected. And Madam President, we found out about this through a reporter that was working in a meat processing facility. And there were children there that were illegally in the country, brought across. They had been turned over to a sponsor by our Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a part of Health and Human Services, and they were in a labor gang. We can't get an answer from HHS about this. So that amendment plus 1538, which would require in-person home visits so we can find out where these children are, those should be things that we agree with, And that ought not to be a partisan issue. That should be something that is a part of a Homeland Security bill. Now, 1533 would require any funding to the UN to be contingent on the organization placing Hamas, Hezbollah, and other foreign and Iranian proxies and groups designated as foreign terrorist organizations on the UN Security Council consolidated list. Terrorist organizations ought not to get the money that is coming from U.S. taxpayers. So it is, there are so many concerns about this process, about this legislation, and the fact that we would rush to pass this so we can go have a good shaken howdy in Munich, I think is so disrespectful of the American taxpayer. It's disrespectful of Tennesseans. We should have taken up H.R. 2. We should have amended and debated that. And we're here when we have a week where we would be working in our states, and we know that this legislation that is in such a rush to be passed for the celebratory moments is dead on arrival in the House. Madam President, I reserve the balance of my time.